r/askreddit. What are some deeply unsettling facts that you know?
In the 1800s, a lot of dentures were made using the teeth of dead soldiers.
The number of people older than you never increases.
The USA has lost 6 nuclear weapons that were never found.
It's worth noting that nuclear weapons don't stay fresh for long without proper maintenance. A weapon that was lost decades ago couldn't detonate anymore by its own. You'd have to first sum of all fears it by bribing some Russian nuclear scientists to restore it to working order for you, which, while possible, isn't a skill set super easy to come by for your average garden variety terrorist.
Terminal lucidity is the return of mental clarity or memory or consciousness shortly before death. This happens to around 10% of people with dementia.
My grandfather had this. Was basically comatose from dementia. Nothing left of him. In his final moments, he opened his eyes, told my grandmother he loved her, and then just faded away.
Cows don't convert grass directly into protein. They have enormous colonies of bacteria in their stomachs that have population explosions when they eat grass live, breed, die, and then the cows digest them into protein.
Cows are bacteria ranchers. Cowception.
Leafcutter ants are farmers too. They feed the leaves to a fungus and then eat that, not the leaves.
That this thread is going to end up on one of those text-to-speech YouTube/TikTok channels.
It's already on BuzzFeed. Whoa! This is most traction I've ever gotten on a post. Ha ha! I was just making the joke that every week I see questions posted, probably from BuzzFeed employees, and the comments from our fellow Reddit community are then copied and pasted. That I think is bullshit and lazy. They are getting a ton of money from adverts users for using content that we did not agree for them to share outside of Reddit. At least people should be asked and even better compensated for their stories and comments.
There were Holocaust survivors that died shortly after being liberated because their body couldn't handle the increased calories when they were fed by the soldiers that freed them.
In the HBO show Band of Brothers, in one episode they get to a concentration camp that had been recently abandoned by the Nazis. The soldiers free the imprisoned Jews, but shortly after have to corral them back into their cells, specifically to avoid this from happening. That was heartbreaking to watch.
That episode and series doesn't pull any punches for sure. I love seeing the troops get on the civilians for not telling them about the camps too. You're telling me you couldn't smell the stench?
The astonishing fatality rates that can be found in so many battles in the First World War weren't accidents or unfortunate byproducts of the technology. They were factored into the battle planes. By the nature of attritional warfare, it was calculated how many men would be lost every week, and commanders drew up enough reinforcements to replace them. This was called normal wastage.
I remember reading about the German plan at Verdun. The idea was to attack a target the French couldn't afford to abandon and force them to throw more and more men into the neat grinder to hopefully deplete the French army. It almost worked too. Some regiments of the French army reported an over 100% casualty rate.
Eirk Falkenhayn's original plan was just to take Verdun, as it was indeed an important piece of the French defensive apparatus. After it failed, he was like May. I just wanted to see them suffer anyway, but the attack was indeed a failure. Germany's mistake in this battle was to always leave the same troops in Verdun. If you were a lancer in Verdun on 18th of February and didn't get killed or injured, chances were you stayed there until 21st of November. France, on the other hand, constantly swapped divisions, moving in fresh troops for a few weeks, then moving them back in a quieter part of the front once the men were worn out by the fighting. Around 70% of all poilus at least spent some time in Verdun.
In 2018, my sister was murdered. We know who did it. We keep track of where he lives. He has moved 4 times since my sister disappeared. The police also know he did it. There's not enough evidence to bring him in or charge him. Her body has still never been found. If I go after him, he becomes the victim, and I won't be able to be a father to my children. He gets to be alive every day. He's a serial rapist. We suspect my sister was not his first murder. From our interactions with state police and FBI, my impression is that our situation, while a nightmare, is perhaps not as rare as you would normally assume or hope.
My sister was murdered in 2018 as well. We also know who did it, where he lives, and I look him up on the state court records every so often to see what other crimes he's accruing. The police know it's him, have evidence, but the prosecution still will not file charges. The one witness they had died while waiting for trial, so her death may never find justice. Sadly, unless some other evidence or witness comes to light, this bastard gets to be alive every day as well. All I can hope for is karmic justice at this point.
In the Battle of Verdun, over 1 million artillery shells were fired onto a 19-mile wide stretch of land in the first 12 hours. If you were lucky enough to survive until then, the sound alone was enough to drive you insane.
Veteran criminals in the gulags would recruit naive prisoners for their escape attempts, called cows, for the sole purpose of eating them when they ran out of food in the Siberian wilderness.
18th century sailors going between London and Shanghai did the same thing.
Drinking bars had trap doors that would drop. You wake up on boat, jump or work.
They used to not use anesthesia on babies when they would do surgery.
And it really fucked up those kids' health for the rest of their lives. Turns out that kind of pain and stress is terrible for your body and mind.
In extreme cases of scurvy, your scars break down and old wounds reopen. Collagen keeps scars together, and the collagen maintains itself throughout our lives. But without vitamin C, that process begins to halt, and the collagen breaks down. Eat your fruits and veggies, folks.
The weirdest thing about scurvy is how it's showing up in well-off people. Some modern diets cut out all fruits and vegetables, leading to very low vitamin C. People then start getting weird symptoms, like bleeding gum.
There was a guy at my mate's uni who subsisted on nothing but cheese and bacon rolls and cheap cordial for a semester. Went to the doc. Doc took ages to diagnose him because, naturally, who the F gets scurvy in the middle of Brisbane, Australia, in the 21st century?
Most serial killers won't ever even be noticed. Never mind captured.
Long before I met my husband, he was dating this totally normal, nice girl, had dinner over at her house with her family, no red flags or warning signs, until the news announced that the police had finally caught the local serial killer that they'd found bodies buried in the yard around his home. Was his girlfriend's dad.
Once symptoms start, rabies has a 100% mortality rate. Fortunately, the incubation period is several months, so get that shot as soon as possible.
The incubation period is actually vast and unpredictable. The virus can incubate anywhere from several days to up to 9 years. Rabies is straight up my worst nightmare.
Dogs like squeaky toys because it sounds like prey that's frightened or injured.
On the bright side, I've heard stories of dogs who immediately drop their squeaky toy after it squeaks and whimper and cuddle with it. Also, my dog prefers tug-of-war toys because he's an asshole who thinks everything is his. I've seen him drop everything just to take a toy from somebody else.
Years ago, I remember watching an episode of the show Monsters Inside Me, where this 16-year-old kid was doing something outside and a fly flew into his eye. It only made contact for about a microsecond, but it was enough time for it to lay egg. After they hatched, they started eating his eye from the inside, and he was starting to go blind until a doctor finally figured out what was wrong. Just imagine that getting your eye eaten from the inside and losing your sight all because a fly very briefly made contact with you. Ever since I learned about this, I get really paranoid when there is a fly around my face because of the fact that this could possibly happen to me.
Wait, are you effing serious? Because like a month ago, a fly really flew into my eye.
F.
The US are built a massive arsenal of nuclear weapons and then dissolved, leaving poorly paid guards behind who no longer had a USR to hold allegiance to. This made them vulnerable to being bought off by the highest-paying bidder to feed their families, and a whole bunch of those nukes just vanished, and no one knows where they are.
With the permafrost and tundra thawing out, bacteria and other microorganisms that we know nothing about are becoming active again.
Pandemic, aye. Electric Boogaloo.